All right, so welcome in. Okay, interval notation. I want to talk about doing a notation in brackets and using inequalities. So if you have the real line, so here I designated it with an X, it can be anything, Y or Z, it doesn't matter. And it's some particular interval between, let's say, some number A and then some number B that you have. And you want to be able to tell someone without actually continuously drawing it, how would we do that? Now, one thing that I would want to distinguish, so we notice that we have, so right here, we have this A, and it's a big dot there, and it's a filled dot. And then we have this B, which is a non-filled dot. And then in between here, I drew a line between this A and this B. Now, what would this actually mean is that you want to be able to take all your values of X. So you want to take all your values of X, which are basically less than B. So they do not include B, so that's why we just put less than. And this is the unfilled dot that we have. And they are, however, greater than or equal to A. Now, if I would remove, this equal to, then this dot that I would have here, I would have to leave it, just by kind of the notation that we do, I would have to leave it blank like I did with the B. But because it includes the A, then what we do is, so we put A is basically less than or equal to this X. And now this notation right here is called an inequality notation because we're using inequalities to try to designate exactly the same thing as we have in the graph. Now, if we wanted to designate this in bracket notation, and instead of using these inequalities, which sometimes is a little bit easier and it's not as cumbersome, it's not as long, then what we do is we use brackets to designate when the A is included or when it is not included, and the same thing happens with the B. So the same thing you can write, instead of using this inequality notation, you can write this as simply saying, in brackets, so what we do is, it includes your A. So we use a square bracket to include the A. And then we put a comma, which means all the numbers starting from A and then going all the way up to B. But now we can't put a square bracket here because it does not include the B. So instead what we do is we include a round bracket. So it's almost like an ordered pair. It looks like an ordered pair if you were graphing it out. But, this is actually the designation where what you have is this right here is designated by the square bracket. And then this right here is designated by an open bracket. And that's what you have. Now I want to show you basically there's almost kind of like 9 different things that can possibly happen. And I'm going to do it both in bracket and in interval kind of inequality form so that you can compare the two. And I'll talk you through it. All right, so here they are. So I'm going to do it one by one. So the one on the top, so notice it has no A's, no nothing. And what I have done is basically, all I have just the entire number line. Now, when there are no restrictions on the number line at all, and it includes all the numbers, which means basically all the real numbers, then how would we designate this? Well, if we're using inequalities, there are no inequalities to capture this, and all we say is that the X basically is an element of all your real numbers. And if you've forgotten about real numbers as kind of sets, I'll put up a link up above there for you, all right, just as a refresher. Now, if you wanted to designate exactly the same thing using kind of the bracket notation, then what we write is, this includes all the numbers from negative infinity to basically positive infinity. Now, we put the round brackets here because we can't really include, so infinity is not really a number, we can keep going and going towards it, but it won't have the square bracket where it basically includes it. So be careful when you're doing this notation. So include the round brackets within here when you have and use this notation. On our second one, so this one right here that we have, okay, so what I'm going to do is, okay, so for this notation, I'm going to say that, all right, let us include, and here I'm going to include, okay, all the numbers, and here I'm going to go all the way right here. So I'm going to be shifting this over. Let's maybe not make it this fat per se, okay, in terms of the length of it. So we have all of this. So it will include all the numbers except A. So all numbers that are greater than A, okay, we would write it in this particular form. So if I wanted to write this out, this would say that, all right, so this includes X, okay, which is greater than A, but it doesn't include A. And if I wanted to write this out in bracket form, then what I would have is, okay, so I'm starting at A, but I'm not including A, and I'm going all the way to the positive infinity. That's what I would have there. That's how we would designate this. Now, if you wanted to include the A, so in that case, what we would have to do is, we would have to actually fill, so this particular dot, okay, so we would make it filled, and then we would include all of the numbers in this way, so it would just keep going in that direction. And what that would be is, this wouldn't be X, which is greater or equal to A, that's how we would write it, and now instead we would put a square bracket, this would have been A, and this goes all the way to infinity. Now again, we put round brackets around infinity, because infinity is not really a number. All right, so that's how we would have this. Now, if on the other hand, so at the bottom right here, so what if we wanted to use less than? So I'm going to duplicate this and put it right here. Okay, so how would we designate this if it would be including all the numbers which are basically less than B, but don't include B? So in that case, what I would do is I would say, all right, so this is X, which is less than basically B, whatever that B is. And in terms of writing it out, so what I would have is, so this would not include the B, but it would go all the way to the negative infinity. So it would be that. So on the left, we have the bracket notation. And then on the right, okay, we have the inequality notation. And those two should make sense. And we do use both, sometimes within math, depending on what's convenient. And you should be comfortable with using both. Now, of course, just like in the example with the A, I can make these. So I can fill this out completely. And I can say that, all right, so it's going to include everything. It's going to include the B and then everything that I have, which is running to the negative side. So I would have to write it in this form. Okay, so it includes the B. And now I would have to put a square bracket. That's a B. And then this would be negative infinity, okay, in this direction. So I hope that these kind of make sense to you so that you can kind of see them and make sense of them. Now, the rest of these is basically what happens if you have the interval somewhere in between, right? So if I would take this, let me duplicate it. Okay, I'm going to take it from one to the other, make it smaller so it includes everything except, okay, actually A and B. So how would I write this out, okay, the way that it is drawn out? So the way that I would write this out is that I would have, oh, all right, so this is going to be, okay, X, which is greater than A, but it is less than B. So that's what I would have here. It doesn't include because the open circles that I have around. And now in terms of setting it up in bracket notation, it would actually kind of look like an ordered pair where you have both round brackets around there. Now, as soon as you make these, so any of these, so if I would, okay, just like as I had it in the original that I started. So if I take this and now I would close it in and I would do the same thing. So let's say if I wanted to duplicate this right here and kind of do exactly the same thing in this way, then what I would have to write is this is A, so it still doesn't include the A. Now it includes the B. So we would write it like this in inequality form. And in terms of writing it, so right here in bracket form, and then this is what we would have. So it includes the B, but doesn't include the A. And we can keep going, right? So, you can switch them back and forth. Of course, what I could do is I can say, well, what if I wanted to include the A, but I didn't want to include the B? So what I would have to do is, so I would have these between, but now I would have to circle this in. So this circle that I have in here, let me fill it in. And so that would have been the case for that. And I would have had a square bracket here and an open bracket on the other side. That's what you would have there. And then finally, if both of them are filled, well, in that case, if I'm going to fill both of these, if this is filled and then also this is filled, then what I would have to do is I would have to put square brackets around all of them and then include the inequalities so that they do include both of these. So this would have been something like this. All right. So I hope that, with all of these, you kind of get the understanding the difference between a bracket notation and then an interval notation. And by the way, just to leave you off, you may have, so if I would kind of take this, let me copy one of these right here. I'm going to copy this and paste it and give you an example which could be general, because what might happen, well, maybe, you might run into something like this. Let me remove this from here, and instead, what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, okay, well, this is going to include all the numbers going to the negative side. All right, so it's going to include all of those numbers. So it kind of goes like this, and it keeps going in this direction. And then maybe, okay, it also includes all of these numbers, okay, going into this direction as well. So it includes all of those. So now, how would I designate, okay, so something like this, if someone gave us this? Well, I wouldn't be able to designate this just with a single kind of bracket or interval notation. I would have to use kind of multiple things. Because notice that's this right here. This basically means if I used bracket notation, it would have meant, okay, this means all of the numbers. Now I am including the A here. So that's that. And then this right here, what does this mean? Well, this means that I would include, okay, so I would have a B, and then it would go all the way into infinity. Okay, so and I would put a comma here, and that's how I would designate this. So you can use multiples of these if you like. And what this excludes, okay, it doesn't include any of these in the middle. All right, so between the A and the B, it includes the A but doesn't include the B. And if you're writing this out in notation in terms of intervals, then here what you would say is, so X, okay, in this case is basically less than A, comma, and then X here is basically greater than B. Now on the A side, I guess I have to include the A as well, so I would do that. And that would have been the notation for this. All right, so I'm going to kind of stop it here. And you hopefully now will have a good idea between these two different notations that you're going to run into. And they're super useful if you carry on in math and you start designating sets. And then later you might even talk about domains and ranges and so on as you study functions. Okay? All right. Okay. Take care, everybody. Thanks for watching.